I'm working on this 1993 Polaris Indy, and the problem I'm having with it is that after it warms up and I ride it for a little bit, it doesn't want to idle. And lately it's been experiencing this really heavy bog where you go to give it throttle and you can just hear everything struggling and the machine just doesn't have any power. It barely moves. And there's a handful of mistakes I made in diagnosing this problem, and so I had to backpedal a couple times, and I am going to show you sort of what I went through to try to solve this problem. Any piece of equipment that I own, I always buy the factory service manual for it. And this one says that if it fails to idle, it all points to carburetor problems. And I believe the bog is because it's flooding, because the air filter and just the entire engine bay just really smells like fuel. Since the manual also says that flooding could be related to the carburetor, I decided it was finally time to just take the carbs out and clean them really good. So the first thing I need to do is remove these two screws to remove the fuel pump, and in the video I've already done that. Then I'm going to remove the air box, and there's these little clips that hold it in place, and you'll need a small screwdriver to try to pry them off. And they really like to fly all over the place, so just maybe get yourself one of those magnet tools. But in my case, since most of them are missing anyway, I only had to remove 3 of them. Once you have all the clips off, you can take the top of the air box off. And it helps if you turn it and sort of push it forward and put it underneath all of those hoses. Now we're going to remove the bottom of the air box with these 2 screws. And what I find helpful is if you lift up the belt cover, you have a lot more access to those 2 screws right on that side. There's one more screw right here that's kind of hard to get to. Missed this part filming, but the bottom of the air box you just pull out from each of the carbs and twist it just like you did the top. Once that's done, we can go ahead and loosen these Phillips head clamps that hold the carburetor in place. You want to get them really loose, that way it makes it easier to pry the carburetor off. Once those clamps are loose, get a good grip on the carburetor and just wiggle back and forth, and you'll eventually feel it pop off of the boot. Move the tube at the bottom out of the way, and then you just need to move the carburetor so that you have access to all the connections. Make sure you also shut the fuel off by turning this valve clockwise. Now we'll loosen this nut, which is for the choke cable. You're going to want to use an adjustable wrench or an open end wrench. Once you get it loose, you want to be really careful because there's a spring and a lifter for the choke that you don't want to lose or drop in the snow. Take the spring out. There you go. Using a pair of pliers, I'm going to loosen these clamps to remove the fuel hose. There's also a breather hose on the side that you'll want to remove too. This cap has to come off. And it's not supposed to be this tight, but you might have to use a wrench. And once you unscrew it, this is what you'll see on the inside. Now you could take the whole thing apart and clean it, but I decided to just leave it all together and clean it as one whole piece. Okay, we've got the carburetor inside, and now we're going to remove this drain tube right here. And I saw a video where someone explained the importance of cleaning this out. The manual doesn't say it, but apparently, all the gunk and waste ends up in here, and if you don't clean it out, it can just end back up in the carburetor. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the float bowl. You just loosen these 4 Phillips head screws. Now I was worried about having to pry this off, but mine just came right apart. Now we're going to remove the floats, and they have these 2 very, very little caps on the tops here that stop the float from sliding out. So I took some needle nose pliers and just very, very, very carefully pried off. You don't want to bend these pins. So they come out, and then you can clean them off. Okay, now we're going to remove the main jet right here. And you probably could use a crescent wrench, but I'm definitely just going to put a socket on it just to be safe, and that is a 6mm socket. Oh, okay, it wasn't very tight. I'm going to compare that. Oh, ooh, be careful. Okay. Now we're going to remove the pilot. It's really hard to see, but there's some threads for a flathead screwdriver down in there, and you just have to be really careful. I'm going to try to film this, but I can't make promises. Okay. Okay. That's the pilot. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this as the float arm. And to do that, there's a little pin here. It goes one way, but you're essentially going to take a punch, kind of hit it out. I'm going to maybe use a pick and try to just push it out, but we'll see if that works. I don't really have a punch on me right at this moment. I might have to use my pick as a punch. There we go. Okay, finally found the 10mm. It was outside. Again, not super tight, so keeping that in mind when I go to put it back together. Is actually a little gasket. And so if you look at the carburetor this way, right here, mine's a little dirty, is the pilot air screw. Now every carburetor for different machines is different, and so this is where you really want to consult the service manual, because I see people on forums just shouting out numbers for their machines, and people are just taking that as truth, and then they wonder why their carburetors don't work. So mine is supposed to be a full turn past tight. You tighten it and then take it a full turn loose. I haven't touched it yet. I'm going to see where it's at compared to it and go from there. Now that I can tighten it around, I would say that was maybe even closer to 3/4. So 3/4 of the way, I don't want to keep forcing it. So we're going to loosen it because we're going to want to clean this out too. The other two carburetors that I pulled out were 2 full turns loose. Looks like that. Yeah, mine is disgusting. Oh. Okay, I almost learned this the hard way. There is a spring in there. I cleaned the first carburetor and got to the second one and realized the spring is there, and then panicked and went and go check back on the video and realized that the spring was in there the whole time, and I managed to clean the carburetor and the spring was still in there. So make sure you don't lose that spring, otherwise your idle is not going to work at all. So now that everything's off, the manual just talks about cleaning it really well. You can soak it in a solvent, but I don't have that. I just have regular carbon choke cleaner, and I'm going to take it outside and do this because this is also my living space, and I don't want to be breathing in those fumes. I'm not going to film that, but essentially what I'm going to do is just get all of the holes and all of the little pieces like this one, and I'm just going to clean it super well. Okay, now we can go ahead and put everything back together now that it's nice and clean. And since I took this off and I have it out, I just got a whole roll of fuel line at my local hardware store. I'm just going to match up an exact size, cut it, and replace it. I got my new piece of fuel line cut, so now I'll just transfer the clamps over. So now you put them back in one at a time, and you clean one carburetor at a time, and you put them all back in the same way you took them out. This next part is a little bit above my expertise. There's probably better videos out there on how to do this part, but what I'm doing is I'm syncing the carburetors. Because there's 3 of them, when you hit the throttle, you want all 3 to open up at the exact same time, and you also want all 3 to close at the exact same height. Now, you have to look up the exact measurement for your specific carburetor, but mine is 3/16 of an inch. It's actually a little bit over that, under that, but the closest measurement I had was a 3/16. So you take a drill bit, you stick it into the carburetor, and by adjusting the throttle cable nut on the top, you can either raise or lower where that piston sits. Once the carbs are synced, you can lock it in with that bottom nut, and then you can fine adjust it with the stop screw to get the height right. With everything put back together, it started right up, and I probably should have let it warm up a little bit more, but I was just eager to take it for a test ride. And unfortunately, the bog was still very much there. I was trying to give it basically full throttle, and it was just barely picking up at all. After driving it for a little bit, the bog was inconsistent, and I did manage to get full power from it, but it still wasn't quite right. And unfortunately, when I came to a stop, it was not right. And unfortunately, it reeked of fuel, and it was still very obvious that the machine was flooding. I kind of overlooked these float arms. They're actually supposed to be adjusted to sit level with the carburetor. And what it does is it controls when or not to allow fuel into the bowl, and if something's not right, it will just dump fuel into the carburetor and flood everything. And you adjust it by pushing up or down on that little tab right there until it sits level with the carburetor. I read some forums, and a lot of people had success in just siphoning out the bottom of their tank and getting all the old gas and nastiness out from under it. And so I went with the old-fashioned method to siphon it, and the gas looked great. It's kind of bittersweet because you wouldn't want to see mud at the bottom of your tank, but in this situation, I was kind of upset to see that the gas was perfectly clear, especially because I'm dumping it into a dirty bucket, so it was kind of just a waste of gas, but I am glad that I looked. The manual also suggested that it could be because the diaphragm in the fuel pump ruptured. And I didn't take this on video, but you basically just take out all the screws around it, you pull it apart, and there's like a little plastic screen in there that shouldn't have any holes or tears in it. And mine looked good. So the other thing I did was replace this fuel filter right here. And to do that, you shut the fuel off, and then you literally just disconnect it like any hose. And since you're going to disconnect this end, you might as well do the other fuel filter that's down in the tank. And to do that, you just undo this clamp, and then there's a nut right here that you can loosen, and it's basically just another barb fitting that holds the line in the tank. So you undo this, and you disconnect the hose from the other end that's in the tank, and then what you can do is you get yourself a wire or anything that you can make a hook shape, and kind of take this out, and you might be able to see it down in there, but you just, and you can fish it out. Mine looked really good. I did spray it with a little bit of carb cleaner, but I really didn't even need to replace it. I didn't think this was the issue anyway, because the thing is running rich. It's clearly getting too much fuel. When a fuel filter clogs, usually you won't be getting enough fuel, but I figured I might as well just cross it off the list. And I wish I could say that all of that work made a difference, but it didn't. And I stopped filming here. I was getting frustrated, and at one point I went to start it up, and it literally caught on fire. I saw it instantly, I shut it off, and I threw snow on it as quick as I could, and luckily there was no damage, but clearly something was very wrong. I like to document these projects because it really shows how easy it is to get tunnel vision when you're trying to solve a problem. So recently, I had broken my choke lever, and while trying to rig it up, I managed to break the choke cable. So I stopped using the choke for a while, and I was just starting it by putting gas in the spark plug holes. I finally ordered a new choke, and I connected it, but for some reason the cable is like an inch too short, and it just doesn't fit where it's supposed to. So I tightened it down, but I wasn't using the choke, and so I just left it. But looking right at the top, the first thing that it says when you're having a rich condition is that the chokes are not seating. So in my mind, I wasn't even considering the choke as any part of the problem because I'm not using the choke. But the choke cable is something that absolutely does need to be adjusted, because if it's too short, then the choke is just always going to be up. And if it's too long, the choke lifter can get hung up in the cylinder and also keep the choke open when you don't want it to be. So to adjust it, you just loosen this top nut, and that will allow you to move around this bottom brass nut, which will let you either give it more cable or take away some cable so that you can sit it just right. And you want about 1/4 of an inch of play in the cable. You also want to make sure that the cables are the same length. And since my cable's too short and I can't hook it up the way it's supposed to, I just rigged it up temporarily just to see how it would start. And just like that, the bog was gone. When I started it up, it was idling right at 2,000 RPM, and when I took it for multiple rides, the throttle response was excellent, and it didn't bog down on me a single time. But it was still having idle problems. After riding it for a little bit, the RPMs will always drop to around 1,000, and you have to sort of feed it gas if you don't want it to stall. So I decided to try something just out of curiosity. I noticed that if I pull the first spark plug cap, you can hear the engine die out. If I pull the middle spark plug cap, the engine did die out. But when I pull this third plug, there's no change. The engine is running exactly the same way without that third spark plug, which means this entire time it's been running on only 2 cylinders. In my next video, I'm going to diagnose the misfire in the 1 cylinder. I've already done a little bit of the groundwork, so I have an idea of what's wrong with it, but that'll be soon to come. Thank you for watching, and good luck with your machines.